Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, which is brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. My name's Jessica, the host, but much more excitingly with me this week, I have two guests. I have Kurt and Darren here. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself instead of me doing it, because I'm still recovering from this cold, so I'm going to put the work on you. So Darren, could you talk us through who you are and what you do?
Cool, yeah. I am Darren Oster. I'm the creator and lead developer of Adderstone Games, and we make Legends of Avallen. I live in Cardiff, Wales, although I come from Essex in England. And I was a scientist, and I became an RPG creator during the pandemic.
Amazing.
Things all went wrong, and I took an opportunity, and it worked out.
I know so many people that were scientists that now work in the games industry. Like
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a thing. There's some link there anyway. But Kurt, would you kindly introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I live in Japan. I'm a teacher at an international kindergarten. I'm currently a graduate student at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies. So I work at an international kindergarten working with 5 and 6-year-olds. And my master's focus is actually on the use of collaborative storytelling, like role-playing games and so on, with children to improve their language learning capabilities. So that's kind of my research. And I've sort of brought on, because I've been a friend with Darren for a long time, and I'm kind of an old school gamer in a lot of ways. And he sort of brought me back in the fold to help me with Legends of Avallen, which I've been super happy to do and excited about the future for. So.
Amazing. Well, yeah, for this stream, we are going to be talking about Legends of Avallen, and we've got the upcoming Kickstarter for, again, against the Faerie Queene, which we'll be talking about. But before we get into talking about that, I want to chat to you a little bit more about you and your kind of history with RPGs. So Darren, could you talk us through the first tabletop RPG you ever played, or that you remember playing anyway?
I kind of want to go back even further. Like my first RPG was Baldur's Gate 2 when I was like 8 years old. And that really sold me on like the RPG games, story games, choices, the fantasy world, that kind of thing. And that just core memories have been stuck in my head ever since going forward. And then I didn't get into tabletop games until university, much later. I wish I got into it earlier, but I didn't even know anyone that played it. So I had no opportunity to get involved. But then I started playing. Can I say D&D on the Not D&D podcast?
I mean, it's most people's first game, so you absolutely can talk about it. Yes.
Yeah. So I started playing D&D at university, and then I got really hooked. I was like, oh wow, I can make the games that I enjoyed playing as a kid in person and share it with friends at a table. Like it was just better. And then I went to Japan. I played games and role-playing games there in Japan, and I came back. And I really wanted to get more people into role-playing games. And I was finding it difficult with the not-to-be-named game. It's a little bit complicated to begin with. So I started designing my own game that was simpler and more approachable for new players. And that's just kind of where this whole thing took off.
So in order to get people to play RPGs with you, you had to make up your own game.
Yeah, I made my game and turned them into playtesters. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, sounds good. And Kurt, kind of the same question to you. What was the first role-playing game you remember playing?
The first role-playing game, I was obsessed with seeing Dungeons and Dragons ads in magazines back when I was a wee lad. So maybe when I was 11, I bought the original sort of D&D box set, which was kind of the AD&D second edition time period. I don't know if you remember the famous black box set with like the red dragon, but it was like the second revised edition of that. And I can we curse on the stream? Is that okay?
I mean, technically, yeah. Try not to if you can. Yeah,
I'll try not to. Yeah,
they don't like it.
Yeah, that's fair. I want to show this to my niece, so I'll try not to
okay, great. Then definitely, yeah.
But I was obsessed with it. And I taught all my siblings how to play because I just really wanted to do it, which is, in retrospect, was kind of a crazy feat for like an 11 or however old I was, 11 or 12-year-old. And then I got into D&D second edition as I sort of leveled up in my reading ability and went to a lot of conventions and so on. And then I actually was so into it. Yeah, when I was in high school, this was back in the 90s, late 90s. Actually, I had my first publication with the old Polyhedron, which was like when D&D was still owned by like TSR. Like I wrote an article about like foodomancy. It was crazy, about magical foods and all this stuff. And then they went under, and Yeah. And then I pursued music and I left RPGs for a long time. And then later on I got back into gaming through card games, which I was really into. But during that time too, I was really into Legends of the Five Rings. So I played a lot of the card game and also the role-playing game and some LARPing back when I was in high school and so on. And then I left gaming for a long while and came back to it in the last few years because my buddy Darren, who I met here in Japan, he used to teach here. And he was a gaming nerd, and we sort of like vibed really hard, and we've been sort of some best buds ever since. And when I found out he was designing a game, I was like, hey, yeah, cool, tell me all about it. And that's kind of how I got brought into the fold, because I have a lot of old man references.
Old man wisdom. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, just despite your young age, that's good to know. Yeah. And I'm going to say young age. Well, I feel like we're a similar age based from when you aged yourself in high school. So I'm going to say, yes, us young.
Fair enough. Yeah. Us young bucks and buckuses.
If you ever want to feel old, though, if you go on TikTok for a while.
Don't tell me about it. I tried to mock it. Yeah,
it's wild on there. Someone was like, "Oh yeah, so for the older generation, so the people like born in the late '90s," and I was like, "Excuse you, son?" Like, yeah. But anyway, stay off TikTok if you don't want to feel very old. Okay, so going back to the game, talking about the Legends of Avallen, you did a Kickstarter that went pretty well and kind of launched this. Darren, could you talk us through the game and the Kickstarter that first came out?
Yeah, so Legends of Avallen is a role-playing game inspired by Celtic mythology in Roman Britain. So this is a game where you can be walking through the forest and accidentally stumble into the other world and be subject to the mischievous fate. There's warrior queens and druidic kings, and on the south of the island there's an imperial force coming in, exerting a new culture and laws upon the land. And amongst all this turmoil, you're just a blacksmith, you're a shepherd, you're a baker, you're a humble villager who's looking to make something more of themselves. And then you quest out into the world, and then you learn how to fight and how to use magic, and you rise up and become a Legend of Avallen. So the game's all about humble origins and growing from there. And yeah, we brought it to Kickstarter after going to a few conventions, and then brought it during the pandemic, and it went really well. We raised a bunch of money. And then we developed and wrote the game and did a whole bunch of playtesting. And then we signed a publishing agreement with Modiphius, who are the biggest UK RPG distributor. And that's been going great. And then now we've got our next Kickstarter coming for a campaign book. So yeah, it's going good.
Amazing. So it sounds really super interesting. What I really liked about the game is kind of the card-based kind of element in it, so mechanically with that. So could you just like explain that for people that aren't familiar with the game, so how that kind of works?
Yeah, so the game, because you start off as just a humble blacksmith or shepherd, you don't have all the bells and whistles when you begin with in other games. You get those later. And so we still wanted the game to be fun to play and to be super interactive. And the way we did that was really emphasize creativity and teamwork. So whenever you make a check, you flip over one card. There are 4 attributes that match each of the suits. Hearts for vigor, agility for diamonds, clubs for wit, and spades for spirit. So you make a check for an attribute, and then if the card matches the color, you add 1 to the attribute. If it matches the suit, you add 2. And then if it's also a court card, you double it. Court cards are special. But if it's the opposite color, then you subtract instead, basically. So, and that can end up with a critical success or a critical failure or successful failure in between. But then the key part of the game is that when you work together, when your allies help you, they give you extra cards to make for the check. So you normally have 1 card. If your friend helps you, you get 2 cards. If another friend helps you another way, you get 3 cards. You can also use aspects of the environment to help you as well. So, for example, you're in a burning building. It's a town hall that's on fire. You're trying to rescue someone who's unconscious on the other side. You're on the top floor. There's a gap you have to cross. There's a beam you put down to help you cross the gap. There's fire beneath you. There's smoke rising up, and you want to cross this beam to get across. And your ally says, "Well, I can hold it down to keep it steady for you to cross." Great. There's an extra card. The other ally says, "I've got a spear. You could use that. That'll help you balance." Great. There's an extra card. Then the game master reminds you, well, the smoke billowing up coming past, they'll make it difficult for you to see your footing, so that's a disadvantage. So you take one of those bunches away, you've got 2 cards left, flip them both, and that's how the game works. It's all about you using your allies and your environment to your advantage. Yeah.
Amazing. And because obviously the cards are a way to kind of almost randomize a bit in a way dice rolling would, obviously a little bit, but in a different way. When you've kind of played your hand, is that how you'd say it?
No. So it's just a deck of cards, and you take the cards from the deck.
Okay.
So the reason why we use cards instead of dice is actually because of the playtester. Originally, we were using dice because all games use dice. Like, why would you use cards? But we were finding it difficult because we wanted to be able to have lots of advantages for checks. We wanted to have rolling lots of dice at the time. We also wanted to be able to keep dice as like stored advantages that you can cash in later. And it was difficult to see between which dice had been rolled and which dice hadn't been rolled and which had been saved. And then a playtester just suggested using cards. He said, well, you can have cards that are face down. And then you can see, okay, these have been saved and stored. And then you can count up your cards before you reveal them. So there's this really satisfying gameplay loop where you create advantages for your check. You take the cards from top of the deck, stack them up, all face down. I have my face down cards here, you have your face down cards here. I give you some of mine as well to help you out. And then we get ready and then we flip them all and then find the best one. And then once we tried that the first time, I was like, oh, okay, this is where the game is. This is how the game's going to work. This is what feels right. So then we made a custom deck of cards for the first Kickstarter that looked really cool. And then for the second one, as you see here, we got another custom deck we're going to make that they're going to look,
nice.
Look fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, they do look very pretty and nice. Can you just play with regular playing cards though? If you just
you can just play regular playing cards. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. I like that. And I've got an image on the screen for everyone watching live where it looks very pretty with the cards there. But I'm going to talk a little bit now about the kind of the next upcoming thing. So the campaign book we've got, and you very handily gave me a little trailer to put on. So I'll put that on, which will be a nice intro. So watch that now.
With blooms of blood and forgotten dream, Avallen's hearts will love or wilt, and gods shall die in unweaving against the gaze of the Faerie Queene. Grymu ymlaen.
So that feels pretty epic for a campaign book video there.
Thanks.
But yeah, and as it mentioned in the trailer, this is can be used with 5e. So if you refuse to play anything that D&D 5th edition, first of all, while you're listening to the podcast, you can play that. But obviously it also is designed to be for Legends of Avallen. We will be mostly on this podcast talking about how it interacts and plays with that. So yes, that was a great little overview kind of the setting. Kurt, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about kind of how this came about and how kind of the ideas behind it based on kind of real mythology and things.
Yeah, I remember when we were first making the game, like we were talking about mechanics, and Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, you had dinner with someone who was like in the industry and made the suggestion to sort of situate it. Because, a rule system is one thing, but a lot of times when we play games, we often play them because they're evocative of something. And I think Darren and I sort of started talking about it because I'm kind of like one of his sounding boards for various ideas. And he's living in Wales, and we were just like, well, what if we sort of explored the country that you've been living in? Because he was living in Wales, 2-3 years at the time, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, longer. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think we're all sort of familiar with the Welsh mythology, but in sort of a distant way. Like we sort of interact with it through other media that we're familiar with. But when we kind of sent out this idea, and he's living in the country, we started going like directly to the source, the Mabinogion and British goblins and all these like cool stories where it's really weird. Like it's really cool. Like the original mythology is really cool and weird. and when you interact with it directly, and the monsters, there's so many creatures and stories that seem kind of familiar, but are all at the same time kind of alien because of how maybe we haven't interacted with them so much. So by going back to the source material, we got a lot of inspiration for a lot of the creatures and so on. And then this idea for Against the Faerie Queene sort of came, I think, inspired a little bit from one, our sort of interest in making a campaign book that was, multifarious with different foci that maybe you haven't seen in many campaign books, especially the idea of doing like a heist adventure, which we love heist media, but there's not that many heist adventures.
Yeah, just imagine Ocean's 11, but in a Roman villa. That's what that quest is. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And then building too on a lot of the ideas from the original mythology we built, of like these sort of 5 clans and these mortals that became gods and so on. So it's still its own original mythology, but heavily inspired by the stuff that we read in this Celtic mythology. But this idea of the Faerie Queene was actually heavily inspired also by us being kind of poetry nerds in a way. And the original Faerie Queene. So Edmund Spenser's Faerie Queene, which is what do you remember what year? What century?
1583, 85 to 1590. It's one of the. It's an epic. You're back. This is like one of the longest poems written in the English language. It was written before Shakespeare, and it's You go on. You tell it.
Yeah. Well, he was kind of like he's like the original Eminem in a way. What I mean by that
rap is a form of poetry, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, and kind of what I mean by that is he was really creative in the sense that he used like iambic pentameter, which we're all sort of familiar with, but he also like drew on like old English in order to like make rhymes that wouldn't be possible later. But anyway, we don't want to go too much. This isn't a poetry podcast, but if you have a chance, delve into the Faerie Queene.
Yeah, check it out. It's really cool. Like, I want to show it a bit more. There's fight scenes in this poem, like 2-page long fight scenes, like reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, or between like knights and dragons and Medusa, things like that. It's really, really epic. It's really cool. It's grandiose. And a key point about it as well is that it's written by an Englishman in the 1500s, but it's filtered like Celtic mythology. He's drawing on from the past of like Celtic myths, and a lot of because the Celts didn't write things down. That's the problem. A lot of their history is passed on orally, and we get a lot of it today from people that wrote it down in the medieval ages. And so it's still kind of been filtered a bit through Christianity in some ways and the medieval sensibilities. But when you drag it all together and have a look and see what's common, you can find like all about the fairies, about the tree ents and things like that, that really let you know that, okay, these are the kind of stories they might have been telling 1,000 years ago that we can't experience today, but we can glean it from what their ancestors told, basically. Yeah.
I was just saying, so this campaign setting is kind of like you getting to walk around in that world a little bit, really, then.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And specifically drawing on that inspiration of the Faerie Queene, it's sort of the antithesis of that, or like it's kind of a subversion of that, because the original one is sort of a tribute to Queen Elizabeth, right? Is Elizabethan.
Yeah, that's why she's on the front cover. Yeah, that's not the Faerie Queene. That's actually just Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Or is she?
But it's a metaphor. It's like it's a homage. Oh, that's true. That's true. It's a homage to that. But so we're kind of subverting that a little bit and taking that of what if instead of like this beaming light of British purity, she's this like vengeful badass who's looking to get vengeance for can we do spoiler alert?
Let's just say a crime that she believes was committed against her.
A perceived crime against her. And then the players have to sort of enmesh themselves into her plot to sort of rectify that, and that's how they sort of arise to the occasion and hopefully become the legend sung in poetry and song.
And that's why it's against the Faerie Queene.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you mentioned there's lots of like mythology and monsters and creatures in there. So I don't know if you guys have any favorite sort of monsters or creatures in the book you could share with us to give us a bit of a flavor of that.
Sure. The one I always go to is the one that most people haven't heard of before, and that's the Muckalevy or Nakalevy. This is like a Scottish myth, like a Northern Orkney Isles Scottish myth. This is a terrifying creature, honestly. It's probably the reason why most people haven't heard of it. This is a fleshless horse.
Immediately
with like bile and toxic fumes pouring from its mouth. It has a man as fixed at the torso onto its back. So it's like the man's riding it, but he hasn't got any legs. He's attached to it. So it's not a centaur. This is a horse with a man stuck in it. He also doesn't have any flesh, by the way. And then he has arms that are long enough and fingers long enough that he can kind of like reach the ground. And this thing walks out of the ocean, comes onto land, brings death and pestilence with it, and then reaps all the souls of the beings that he slays along the way and consumes them into his maw. And that's an old Celtic legend that no one's heard of, and it looks awesome. I should have given you a picture for it. We could have shown it on the stream. But yeah, creatures like that are the kind of ones that we want to bring to the forefront. Yeah.
They're quite dark then. That's the thing about British mythology is it's really quite dark. Like I was chatting to someone else and we were talking about kind of more Nordic mythology. And they're like, the thing is that's quite like fun and silly in a lot of ways. Like the Fae are kind of like tricksters. But in Britain it's like, and then they come out of the ground and murder you and your whole family. And it's like, it's different in Britain. It's darker. And I'm like, yeah, it really is. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we have the duality as well. Like so in our world lore we have the Theithra. These are the abominations. These are the arch nemesis of the gods. The Makalevi is one of them, like the greater demons, essentially. And then we have the Fae. They're not necessarily angels. They're not always doing good. They're very mischievous. They can be benevolent too, but they're more pure creatures that serve the gods in their own way. And these are like the Echithlon, which are like dryads. Bubach, which are like furry, wing-fluttering creatures that help out in homes when you're asleep. And more cutes and cuddly things like that. So we have a bit of both. We have the light and we have the dark.
Excellent. Kurt, do you have any kind of favourite monsters or fae from the book you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm really partial to, and Darren, correct, because I'm from California, so everything I say sounds like a surfer guy. But I'm gonna say the Avank. The
Avank, that's right. Yeah, the Avank.
It's spelled with an F. But no, the Avank is this kind of like creature, and the way we describe it is a creature drawn to secrets, and it can sort of obscure itself if it's not looking at you. It'll, but when its eyes are open, it attacks you, and it's a multi-limbed creature. I think there's like multiple descriptions of it throughout history as being snake-like and so on. But the sort of the one we settle on for our game is kind of more of a eldritchy type horror, I would say.
Okay, lovely.
And there's a really cool illustration of it in our core book and with a story related to it. So that has a special place in my heart as a cool, screwed up little creature. So I'm the Avank. Also secrets. Amazing. I love secrets. So that's the other thing. So he's a creature that loves secrets.
Well, I mean, it feels like there's some secrets in this campaign, so it seems like that love of secrets is probably going to come through in the story. So if somebody's setting up to play, so they get the book and then they're going to be playing that with this game with their group, Darren, what sort of recommendations would you have for somebody running this game for the first time?
Cool. So we have a free quick start guide that has an adventure in the back of it, and the rule book has that same adventure in the back of it as well. And it's an adventure that's designed to teach the GM and the players how to play the game like, methodically. So it starts off a bit linear, and then later on there's like a small mini dungeon that you get set loose on, so you get to test everything out and to make your own choices and that kind of thing. And the key thing I would say to someone who's playing the game for the first time is that maybe forget how you play other games, where you're often thinking about what you're doing on your turn to do you. The game really is powered by teamwork. Like it's all about, okay, one of us is going to do this one thing. How can we help them do that one thing? Like, for example, it's most obvious if I was to talk about combat. So in combat, you have to deal a certain amount of damage to overcome an enemy's armor. So if you're fighting the Avank and it has a high armor, which it does, you might have to get a critical hit to hurt it. And that's different from other games where you whittle things down. And this is like, it's more focused on, it doesn't have HP either. So it has like 3 checkboxes, for example, you have to work your way through. Like you break its armor, then you wound it, and then it becomes dying. So you only have to hit it 3 times. The hard part is hitting it the 3 times.
Yeah.
And so then what it becomes about is, okay, you're going in with a sword attack. Great. I'm going to distract it. That's going to give you a bunch of advantages. I'm going to cast a spell on you to soup up your sword. And then you get in there, you flip all these cards, and then you get that one critical hit that pierces its armor. That's what the game's all about. It's working together and using the environment to get singular, like, epic events rather than everyone doing their own little thing. So that's the way I try to explain it. Yeah.
It's really encouraging It's really encouraging storytelling in that collaboration, right? Because then you're not just saying, all right, well, again, not to diss any other games that should not be named or whatever, but sometimes it can feel like, in my experience, like bean counting a little bit, and there's a lot less of that. There is a focus on action resolution in a satisfying, a narratively satisfying way, I think is maybe how I describe it.
So I got really excited talking about the campaign, and I kind of forgot to talk about characters a bit. So we briefly mentioned you're not playing these big heroes. You'll kind of start off quite small, and you're going to go through that journey in the game. But Darren, what mechanically does that look like? So what does character creation look like?
Yeah, so the key part about character creation is you pick a starting profession. These do give you an ability, and you can learn more later on. So, for example, there's animal tamer, there's a crafter, there's alchemist, there's a bard. And then after you pick that, you get your profession kit that lets you use your abilities. And you choose your attributes in 4 of the attributes we described earlier. And then after that, you have to pick a motivation, a virtue, and a flaw. And these aren't just role-playing pointers or tips for you. They do have a mechanical impact on the game. To begin with, the most important during parleys, which is when you're having diplomatic talks with another NPC. If you invoke your personal aspects in a way that appeals to theirs, because all NPCs will have them as well, that can give you advantages. Also, you can figure out what the NPC's personality is as well and use them against them. So if you're talking to a merchant and they're greedy, if you figure that out, then you can use their greed against them and gain advantages for it that way. And then later on in the game, there's a whole hero's journey arc that you have that your character goes through that plays through these personality aspects, and you can change them as well. And there's kind of like an inspiration mechanic that's tied to that. That's a whole other kettle of worms. Kettle of worms? Kettle of fish? Kettle of tea?
Kettle of worms. Why not? Yeah, kettle of worms. Sounds esoteric and fake.
But then as you level up, you later on you choose a class, and that gives you some magical powers or some martial powers. There's the warrior, the reaver, the mage, and the mystic. And then further on, you choose a legendary path. And this is gladiator or druid or tailing, which is like a Celtic warrior guardian. Or the swin-picked, which is like the traditional naked Celtic warrior who has paints all over themselves, except in our world, these paints are magical. They do offer you protection, and they summon spiritual weapons from the void, and they cast spells as they attack people. They're really awesome. So you choose a legendary path, and then they gain you like the awesome abilities. These are your legendary hero abilities. But to gain those, you have to complete legendary trials. These are things like, if you're a gladiator, like win a fight in front of an audience of 200 people, or something like that. Yeah. So these kind of things that let your name get pushed out there, and these are goals for you to achieve. And if you can't achieve them, but you still want the power, you can swear a tungid. This is like a vow or a geas. This is some kind of like magical curse you bestow upon yourself to gain power. But then if you ever break it, you then lose your powers. This is a storytelling point that comes up a lot in Celtic mythology, similar to Achilles, his heel. It's often some kind of like small weakness that you have. So, for example, a druid might, let's do it better example, the Fae Touch. The Fae Touch is a legendary path we have, which is where you gain some Fae powers, but a consequence of it is that you gain some Fae features like pointy ears or miscolored eyes or horns, that kind of thing, that kind of betray your Fae nature to other people, because people aren't too trusting of the Fae for obvious reasons.
Sure, yeah.
And a tungid for them, a vow that they can take is that I will never hide my Fae features. And that has like role-playing consequences where you walk into town. If you're not wearing your hood and your horns out, people are going to know what you are. And it means that if you ever try and hide that feature for any reason, then whatever power you gained from swearing that tungid, you'll lose until you complete your trial to put it back in. So that's the kind of like level up experience that we have. Yeah.
Amazing. So when playtesting that, did you often get people that went against kind of their thing, or do people really stick to their vows so they don't have to go through these things? Or
the closest we came was someone told an NPC what the vow was, which was a stupid thing to do, because then your enemies can use it against you. Right? Once they learn what because that happens in the Celtic myths as well. It's like you can uncover what someone's tongue gids are, what the weaknesses of their vows are, and then try and put them in situations where they have to give them up. And so that happens, and they got put in a sticky situation. But of course, the party managed to figure it out and get out of there, and it was all fine. But, yeah.
I do like that you can use it against them, because that also feels very Fae, because Fae are very strict on like rules and things. So
yeah, exactly.
Part of Fae games is sometimes trying to put someone in a situation where they have to break the rules and be rude.
Yeah,
so actually, there's this kind of social dance that happens around that. Yeah,
100%. Can I tell you about another favorite monster?
Yes, immediately. Yeah.
So there's the Spriggan, which people might know from The Witcher. It appears in the Witcher game, I think, and it's an old Celtic tale, and it's a weird creature. It's got like a baby childlike body, but a very overly large old person's head. It's very strange.
Nice.
It's very powerful though. It can control the weather, control plants and everything. But in Avallen, they just like to have conversations and talk to people. They're not very aggressive, except if you say something that could be gleaned to be insulting, they'll take the insult and then attack you. So they're always looking to be offended, and then they go after you. So you have to be very careful when you talk to them. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's very cool. I like that as well.
I was about to say Twitter.
like Twitter. Wow, what a lovely place to talk about that. So kind of talking about kind of characters in the games. Obviously we've got the kind of the campaign book there, so I don't want to get too many spoilers in. But what's the general kind of session like in this game? So if people have made their characters and they're coming to sit at the table, what kind of stories are they expecting to tell?
Okay, you got any inklings on this?
I mean, like you said, when you start early on, it's very much the people coming out of the profession, because they're scribes and townsfolk, but they're looking to help out and make a name for themselves. So it'll start sort of pastoral, and we do have some. Actually, they were just released after the Kickstarter. We have other adventures leading into the campaign. Terror on the Borderlands that sort of reflect this sort of pastoral setting where you're helping the village elder or what have you with their task around town, and then you're encountering monsters and local beasts and so on. But it definitely, you still have the excitement of the things that you love in RPGs, like meeting strange folk and fighting beasts, but it's much on a lower scale. You're not going out there and thwarting a dragon invasion just quite. It might be a baby dragon, I don't know, it depends on the plot that's happening, but usually it'll be that'll be the sense of low level as they get involved in like local politics and so on. But as they make a name for themselves and they meet bards and people that sort of extol their virtues, then that's when you start to see them taking on the classes and finding the paths that they want, and ideally the narrator and the adventures they go on sort of reflect whatever they're interested in, whether they become bards or reavers or warriors. Hopefully the adventures sort of become slowly but surely get more into the higher and higher fantasy, but building up from those humble origins into the more mythological. So I would say I think one of the key parts of the game that Darren touched on is the fact that this is a super accessible game if you've never played an RPG ever before, because you know what it's like. Everyone knows what it's like to have a job, and that's basically what you start. That's what you start as. But everyone also knows what it's like to want to be more than that and want to be a hero. And I think that's what we're trying to capture, of wanting to be more than your humble origins and slowly encountering things and rising to the challenge. And I think against the Faerie Queene, it's sort of like that. I think we all, over the last 5 years, feel the sense of, we're sort of these common people stuck in the thing. What can we do to make things better and fight these incredible forces that seem unconquerable? And I think that's what storytelling and role playing games so have value on, because they sort of allow us to have that release and to consider it for ourselves and and to try to find the heroic in ourselves. And I think this game tries to capture that. We don't say you're King Arthur from the start, because that's not how true heroism works. It starts by saying your world isn't perfect. How do you address it, Mr. Scribe, and how do you use those skills and become better? And there's a great force on the horizon, and they're pulling you in through your local politics, and your village elder needs help. Can you rise to the occasion? And in a very sort of sad, that sort of old mythology, what do you call it? What's the German term for it? The coming of age story type thing.
Oh, I don't know, dude. That's what your wheelhouse.
The German word for coming of age, is it Kinderstrom or something like that?
Oh, Rundspringer or something like that, is it?
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry,
it's not that, but something like that. Everyone that's German is like, no, Jess, that's incorrect. But that's the thing.
Yeah. So you're not creating your backstory about how you're a cool, thief with this mysterious background. No, it's. I mean, I guess you could have a little bit of that, but I do think there's that value in starting as a person that's coming from nothing, and then you build that background together, and you see it evolve in real time because of the forces against you. So yeah, at the first, it's going to be that you guys want to start off as humble folk meeting weird fae and coming across into the weird, and eventually by the end of it, you become the guy kicking a ball and tearing through a legion of British goblins. That's
amazing.
That's the goal.
I think that style of storytelling makes it more accessible then, because it sounds like if you as a player are unfamiliar with the world and the lore and the setting, your character can kind of be a bit naive to that as well, so you can kind of explore it in the game. So
it's 100%
so that takes the pressure off you feeling like, oh, I have to do homework to get in this game, because I know sometimes that puts some people off trying games. They think, oh my gosh, there's this rich world with all this history, I don't know it, but it sounds like you can just like come in, know nothing, and just like, I'm a villager. Wow, the phase of thing, and you could even approach it in that aspect. So which makes
100%. That's one of the reasons why we made it the way that it was. Just because you can come to this game know nothing and just know I'm a villager. I know how to look after animals. Let's go on an adventure, and then you uncover the world together because you're just from this village, and you might not ever know what was outside your village until you step out there. Kind of like Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings, it's that kind of, very much that kind of feel of what's outside your door could be dangerous, but let's go find it anyway. Yeah.
Amazing. I also noticed with the upcoming Kickstarter, you have an art book, which is very exciting because it's got amazing art. If you're watching the live stream, you can see it here. If you're listening to the podcast, I'll put a link in the show notes where you can have a look on the website. Some of the beautiful artwork. Can we talk about some of the art? Like who did the art for the book, and how did that come about? Because it feels like it creates the tone and atmosphere so much in the game.
So our main artist is a chap called Rafael from Brazil. Rafael Oliveira, I think his last name is pronounced. And he's incredible. And we also have a character artist at the moment called Tom Trengrove. He worked with me for the core rulebook as well. Rafael was new, but I have a particular style that I like to keep in the aesthetic of the world, which is this paintbrush, watercolor kind of aesthetic of something that's not hyper realistic, but kind of something that looks like a legend, looks like a fantasy. And so I try to find artists that emulate that feel. We did an art book for the first core rulebook as well. That was Kickstarter exclusive, and that went over really well. And we're excited to do one for this one as well. And it's going to be not just an art book with concept art inside it as well. But we also get like thoughts from the artists, where they explain what they were thinking, what they were inspired by when they did the art. We also do like a little director's commentary talking about why the art is the way it is, because a lot of thought goes into exactly what it is that you're seeing here, and why it is the way that it is. So we explained that as well. And then we're also going to do like a director's commentary on the campaign book itself. We're also going to go into the Celtic legends that inspired each myth, because we have like a whole list of like, okay, well, these are all these Celtic myths and things we want to tie into the book. How do we fit them in there? We want you to be doing things that they've done inside the legends as well. So we're going to retell those myths inside the art book, and then explain how they tie into the whole campaign and where all the history is drawn from, so you can really delve deep if that's what you're into. So it's going to have art, the concept art, the artist's thoughts, and then the commentary behind the whole campaign book and how it ties into the Celtic legends. So it's like a director's commentary, like a companion piece for it, if that's what you're into.
Behind the scenes look at the book.
Yeah.
I will also say this because Darren wouldn't say it because he's Darren. But it's super interesting through this project because I've known him for a long time. But he's a doctor of physics, and this project kind of revealed his eye for art curation and development and directing, which was a very pleasant surprise. And I think that's also I think that's also a testament to why the art is so good. He's very thoughtful about it. Like he's not an artist himself, but he's able to look at these artists and sort of identify what's important and communicate that and draw that out as well, which I think is not an easy thing to do. Like, yeah, you may not be an actor, but directing is a valuable skill as well. And Darren won't, toot his own horn about that, but I will for him because I think he's doing a bang up job on it. So good job, Darren.
Cheers, Kurt. Thanks.
I love how you said, much to our surprise. We're all shocked that Darren was competent at this.
No. Apparently, if you want to be a great art director, get a degree in physics. I don't know that you would never think that being a thing, but it happened. And it's fantastic. But I get he's a clever bloke. He's a clever bloke, so he was going to be successful one way or the other.
Amazing. So we've been talking about the Kickstarter coming up now. I'll put the nice image on the screen of all the stuff and things you can get there. When is the Kickstarter coming out? If people have listened to this and they're like, yeah, sold, how do we get on board for this?
So we don't have a specific date yet for the actual launch, but it is mid-September planned for. You can sign up on our mailing list if you go to our website, legendsofAvallen.co.uk. Wow, that's amazing, Jess. Great work. Perfect timing. Yes, if you go there with a mailing list, then you'll be the first to hear. We also have a free adventure series that's being released right now.
Great.
During the run-up and during the Kickstarter. That's a 3-part series that does exactly what you asked earlier. Like, where do we go? Well, the quick start begins in the village, takes you to the other worlds, and then the free adventure series takes you to a bigger town, a care, like a fort on the borderlands. There's all sorts of politics that you get involved in. There's a mystery of what's going on here, and you have to decide the future of the borderlands, which is this region in Avallen. So that's been released for free in the lead up to it, and you can find that if you join the mailing list as well. Yeah.
Fab. So you can kind of try it out. So decide if you want to commit to the Kickstarter, see if it's your thing.
Yeah.
Amazing. We love a freebie on here. So legendsofAvallen.co.uk. And if you're listening to the podcast, link will be in the show notes to go and have a look there. So we're kind of wrapping up a bit, but are there any questions that I haven't asked you that you wanted to answer, or anything you want to share about the game you haven't had a chance to yet?
I guess you could say what class do you identify? One of those kind of horoscope type questions. What class do you most identify with from your own game? That could be a cute question to ask. Clearly, for me, it's a bard. I love a musician. I'm a musician, and the thing I love about bards in D&D, obviously they do reflect sometimes. They play music and they share stories, but. And in Avallen they do that as well, but there's also that emphasis on their role as history makers, because in the Valak, they don't have a strong grasp on writing systems. I mean, it's becoming more dominant because the sort of Roman equivalent in our world, the Raxians, are bringing it, but they have a lot of power as people that tell stories and share them, and I think we all sort of identify with that. And so through our book too, you see a lot of poetry, original poetry, sort of related to that, because that's how history and all these things were shared in the past. And you still have the music element, which we see in other games as well, which I love as a musician, but as a person who loves poetry as well, that's my go-to class for myself.
Yeah, and I'll stress as well for the fun of it, that the bard in our game is a humble profession. There's no magic here. You are just a storyteller and a musician, that kind of thing. Then later on, one of the legendary paths is the filly, which is an old Irish word for the high bards, and they can use magic using the music, and that's a whole different thing. So bards are more common here, and like I said, the storytellers, the historians, they give you the news. Super important to the Valak society. Any other questions that you haven't asked that I'd like to answer? I don't know. I kind of want to gush about the Faerie Queene so much. She's a
Please do. Tell us more about the Faerie Queene.
So the Faerie Queene, she... so in our mythos, she's an Elilon, if you say it in Welsh. She's a dryad fae. And this is very much inspired by the Sylvari from Guild Wars 2 in the aesthetic.
Oh my gosh, I love those. Sorry, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, exactly. So she's kind of like made of like her tree, her skin is like bark and wood and twigs and thorns, that kind of thing. And then she has flower petals behind her gown. That's what that is. She is a Taldwith Taig. She's one of the Fair family. These are like the high noble Fae. She's the Fae of the Evermother. So we have 5 gods in our world. We have the Evermother, the Everfather, the Everchild, the Ever-Elder, and the Ever-Stranger. And they each have different domains, and each 5 clans worship one primarily. They were once mortals that then ascended to godhood by slaying the Faithstra, the demons we mentioned earlier. And they reside in the other world, which is this parallel realm to Avallen that you can stumble into by accident sometimes. And she, the Faerie Queene, has a grievance, a great grievance that goes back thousands of years, and she's looking to uplearn everything, but no one knows what she's up to yet, and it's your job to find out and stop her. And she's powerful, she's witty, she's smart, but she's driven by human emotions. She's driven by love and loss and revenge, because she was a human once too. The humans get reborn as Fae.
Okay, yeah.
She has that going for her, and it's hard when we're writing for her because we can relate to what it is that she's going through, and sometimes I'm myself rooting for her until I remember that, oh, okay, if she wins though, she does kill everyone and destroy everything kind of thing, so she must be stopped. But
that's a good villain though, isn't it, when you kind of see where they're coming from and you understand it, not that you're condemning what they're doing, but you're like, I get why you've got there, and I empathize with like your journey and where you are. That's a good villain. They're not just I'm evil because I'm evil, twiddle my mustache style. It's they're a real living being, and it makes sense to what they're doing. That's a well-written villain. So
I'm really excited for people to uncover her story and find out what she's about. She's inspired by a few women in Celtic mythology, particularly. Mm-hmm. There's King Arthur's mother is one of them. Spoilers, but it's Uther Pendragon is King Arthur's dad, and it's his wife. One of the key ones she's inspired by, and we're reimagining if she made a different choice in her story instead of what actually happened. If you want to look into that, yeah.
Sounds amazing. How would you recommend GMs? Because I imagine there's some parts where she might talk to the party, so the GM has to embody this intense character. How do you suggest people approach that? Because I'll be like, oh wow, that's quite a big.
They have to speak Welsh. They have to speak Welsh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Okay, great.
Yeah, nothing else.
Okay. Yeah.
No, she's regal. She is a queen, and she knows that she should be one, and she should be treated as such. And any slight against that would be better punishment. Yeah.
Amazing.
Go on, Kurt. Your thoughts?
Well, I think also in terms of the design of her, I think a big inspiration as we were developing this idea of this sort of arch nemesis is like one of the classic big baddies from that other game, Strahd, right? Like you got this like big sort of overarching person who like you respect and is an intelligent creature, and they have an intelligent villain with like intents and their own motives, and there'll be places throughout the adventures where you'll be able to sort of show a little bit of, not the whole hand, but a little bit of her hand, and enough pointers for the GM to sort of show their players why she's a force to be reckoned with, I think.
Amazing. She certainly sounds like an interesting villain. So if that sounds interesting to you listening, if you go to legendsofavalen.co.uk, it's up on the screen if you're watching, and in the show notes if you're listening, and you can check it out there, so you can be the first to hear about it when it launches on Kickstarter next month in September. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your game with us. One other question I have, which I ask everyone, is if you have any recommendations for any tabletop RPGs that are not games that you've made and that are not Dungeons and Dragons. So Kurt, what would you pick if you're going to give a recommendation?
So as a kindergarten teacher working that does research on role playing with kids, a game that I've gotten to a lot is No Thank You Evil by Monica Games.
Yeah.
And it's the art is really resonates with children, and the themes are really great for introducing kids to the hobby. So if you're either a a parent with kids you might be interested in getting into it, or you have like nephews, nieces, or your teacher, it can be a really great tool for that as well, for introducing storytelling elements and reading and writing in ways that don't feel like reading and writing. Like when I introduce it, I played this game yesterday, No Thank You Evil, with kids. First time they ever played it, and sort of like improvised elements using it with my like 6-year-olds. And it was during the daycare portion of the day, but all these like 4 and 3-year-olds started gathering around because like, oh, what's happening? Like it's a really cool game to sort of to introduce the hobby and you know, start off the next generation. So No Thank You Evil by Monica Games.
Yeah. Darren, what would your recommendation be?
I guess I'm going to cheat and name a game that inspired Legends of Avallen somewhat.
Okay. Well, it technically fits the rules. As long as it's not D&D and it's not one you've written, I guess that counts.
Yeah, exactly. No, I didn't write it. It's Torchbearer. This is, I don't know how well known it is, but it's inspired by the Mouse Guard RPG. But Torchbearer is this game where it's a dungeon delving game. That's what it's about. It has 2 phases. You're in the town phase and you have the dungeon delving phase. And I love how structured it is with that. It's very particular. This is the town phase. This is the dungeon delving phase. There's some things you can do here. There's some things you can do here. And when you delve into the dungeon, there's a constant ticking clock of how long you can spend inside there. How long will your torch last out for? How much food do you have? That kind of thing. And as you delve deeper and deeper, it's always a choice of how deep we want to delve and how risky do we want to be, and when we want to leave. And that inspired Avallen a lot. We didn't make it quite as like Torchbearer is very grindy. It'll grind you into dust if you're not careful. Ours isn't quite like that, but it inspired me so much, showing me that you can really. It's kind of almost board game like in a way. Like it's very structured. This is your turn. Here's what you can do in your turn. And I love that about it. I devoured it, and it really inspired me as a designer. I mean, there's many games that did, but Torchbearer particularly. So yeah, I'd recommend Torchbearer. Check it out.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for those recommendations. Well, that takes us up to the end of the show. So thank you very much for coming along to watch, and thank you for listening. More importantly, thank you to my guests, Darren and Kurt, for coming on to share your game with us. And I really look forward to seeing the Kickstarter coming up next month.
Thank you so much, Jess. This is an awesome podcast. Really enjoying it.
Thank you. It's good to know I've got at least 2 listeners that aren't my mum. That's always good to know. Next week, we will be back with Not D&D. We are having talking about the game 10 Candles. So,
I love 10 Candles. That's also really cool. Yeah.
Me too. I only recently learnt about it, so I was like, I need to get them on the show. So we're talking about 10 Candles. Yes, we'll be back again next week. I'm doing live stream at 10 p.m. BST every Monday, or you can catch up and listen to wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can get all the other episodes as well. So thank you very much, and we'll be heading off now.